And thank you, all the conference organizers, for inviting me to speak here today. It is my great pleasure to do so. I found the information in the last presentation very interesting, and much of what I talked to today has points in common. I believe strongly in software cultures and in mentorships and liaison within this with academia. But we'll cover that as we go on here. So today I'm going to provide some insights that I've gained from creating several successful programming cultures. But these insights are my own. And as you listen to them, please, these are not anything that you have to adopt. I suggest you adapt them, take them in, and if you can, improve on them to make your own software cultures. So a little bit about me. First and foremost, I am a programmer. I got a degree in computer science from the University of Utah, which you may not know, but it was, I was contemporary with several other people there, such as Alan Ashton, who founded WordPerfect. He was my university advisor. John Warnock, who co-founded Adobe Systems. Jim Clark, who founded Silicon Graphics and later Netscape. The University of Utah was a hotbed of computer graphics in the early 70s. And I've been programming and managing programming teams and projects for the last, ever since. So after 40 years of software development at a variety of different companies, some of whom you've heard of, perhaps Pixar, Gracenote, I founded my own company, Wonderful Interactive Storybooks, after I retired because I couldn't stand not to be doing software. So out of these 40 years of software companies, I've learned great insights about how to make software programming cultures. And I worked with many teams all over the world. Not only in the United States, I also had teams in St. Petersburg and in Moscow. I've worked with teams in Korea, in Japan, in India, in the UK, of course, in Australia. All of these are various places where I've had projects that I've personally been involved with a variety of different customers, aerospace companies, automotive customers, Nissan, Toyota, Ford, Mercedes. There are many more than on the board here, actually. Hardware and software companies, Microsoft, Apple, of course, but also HP, Google, Sony. I was actually acquired by Sony and got to see Sony from the outside and inside when it was part of an acquisition. Entertainment customers, Electronic Arts, Walt Disney Animation, Apple. Worked very close with Apple on a variety of technologies. Consumer electronics companies all over the world, from Philips to Sony to Samsung, many, many different companies. This is actually just a small fraction of the companies I had direct projects with. So many companies, many projects, many customers. You know, it's all about software. Well, yes, but it's really all about people. Because people make the software. People are what make the projects happen and succeed. So after 40 years of developing software, a co-author and I wrote a book about managing software projects and managing people. This book, called Managing the Unmanageable, has a center section which is filled with over 300 what we call software rules of thumb. I don't know how that translates to Russian, but a rule of thumb is a simple nugget of information such as measure twice, cut once, which I use many times in many ways, not only when I'm building woodworking projects, but when I'm doing anything in software as well. Make sure that you do the thing you're prepared to do. And so these types of rules of thumb are in our book, but more importantly, they're also throughout the presentation here. If you want to know more about this book, by the way, I have some cards here afterwards. You can go to our website and download parts of the book and other things if you're interested in more information. As well, on Saturday, we're giving a master workshop based upon the book about how to manage software people successfully. So a little bit about software. I'm sure you all know about software. I don't have to say very much. But we've come a long way in a relatively short time. Just over 65 years ago, the first stored program computer executed its first line of code. 65 years is a short time. And yet we've come such a far way from analog, I worked with both of these things, to a ubiquitous digital world. Now, digital is everywhere. You can't escape it. In fact, you almost have to break your cell phone if you want to get away from something. But the programming cultures have changed dramatically. In my first job, it was actually in a company that was a spin-off from Boeing. And we had desks like this, way back then, even in the late 60s. But today, it's much different, huh? So things have changed dramatically from the time then where it was very regimented to a much more free and open environment. There are demands for over 10 million programmers. Some say there will be that many employed by the end of this decade. And a lot of this growth is driven by the Internet of Things. From back here where there was, maybe 1 million computing devices to, over here where there'll be billions by the end of this decade. And each one of these things requires programmers to take and code them, maintain them, service them. Something to think about here. One of the things I heard recently was that even today, there are over 5 billion lines of COBOL code, COBOL, running today, servicing programs and applications. And those are obviously from programs not written recently, written from dozens of years ago. So it's not just new software, it's also maintaining old software. It used to be so simple. There was assembly language and Fortran, and Bill Gates and Paul Allen. Assembly language and Fortran. But today there's a cacophony of programming languages. Hard to keep track of them all. Plus, there are frameworks and databases, access methods, scripting languages, middleware, platforms, and so much more. How do you keep track of all this? Not to mention the tools that you need to use them. Well, the answer is you can't do it alone. You need successful teams. And one of the ways to have successful teams is to craft a successful and effective programming culture. A programming culture that builds core competencies and key technologies. For example, in that slide with all the programming languages, how many of them would be used in one company? Only a handful, I hope, because you need to have core competencies in only certain technologies. And a programming culture that welcomes a community that's diverse with broad age range and different characteristics and core values. In our book, we talk about just one aspect of it. Different generations, from baby boomers to Gen Xers to millennials, and each of them have different characteristics. Some are willing to use technology, some love technology, some is mobile is their defining characteristic. And all of these different values are going to be part of the same workforce. And this workforce is not only in your office, it's going 24/7 as you follow the sun in programming development today. So if you create an effective programming culture, it can make a real meaningful difference to your success. So I'm now going to give you some keys to how to craft this. First of all, a definition. A programming culture is an environment established to cultivate values needed to successfully deliver meaningful results for your organization. I think this is meaningful results. It doesn't matter whether you're a university, whether you're a nonprofit company, whether you're a high-tech IT company. You have to figure out what the meaningful results mean to your organization. And to do that, you have to define success. Success is going to be different in one company than it is in a different company. So where you are in your organization, you have to step back and say, to be successful in my company, what does it mean? Does it mean I deliver on budget? Does it mean I deliver on time regardless of the budget? Does it mean I deliver ahead of time with fewer people? So what does successful mean to you? So you have to start by defining that success. One of the other things is each company has their own culture. And as you take and try to develop your programming culture, you need to step back and look at the company and say, what is good about this company? They have certain values. And some of these values may be great. In the United States, several years ago, we had a company called Enron. And their company values were trust and integrity. Well, I'm sorry. Integrity was not really part of the high management of that company. But if I was in that company, I would have embraced the integrity and the trust part and trusted my programmers to do the right job. But I also probably would have walled off parts of the other parts of the company culture that didn't meet, such as the ruthlessness and the backstabbing that went on in the company like that. So as I've worked in different companies, they've all had their own culture. Some of it is conscious, some of it is unconscious. Some of it may be on mugs and on posters on your wall. If they work for you, embrace them. If they don't, wall them off and develop your own messages. And the final thing, as we head up into the characteristics, is to commit to craft a programming culture where you can meet or exceed the results needed by your company. Become a great manager is also a key to having a great programming culture. Our book tries to take our 70-plus years of experience, my co-author and I distilled it into 9 different chapters about how to be a great manager. And part of it starts with hiring great programmers. So we're going to talk about 16, I believe they are, characteristics of successful programming cultures. These are not the only the only characteristics that are meaningful, but these are the ones we found most meaningful to us. And in my observation of the customers I've worked for in their programming cultures, in the companies I've worked for, from Pixar to Gracenote to lots of other companies that I worked for, we had our own programming cultures that were different in each spot. But we took, and these are some of the most important parts of it. First one we like to talk about is mutual respect. Mutual respect for your programming team. If you don't respect your team and your team does not respect you, what kind of culture can that be? So we think this is very fundamental. You need to value it, you need to nurture it, you need to applaud it. And take and applaud those who show it as well. Delivery. You need to strive for crisp execution. What that means is if you have a project, you need to do everything you can to deliver on that project successfully. If you plan for less than your capacity, you could have done more than you could have. If you plan for more than your capacity, you get less done than you could have. This is one of those rules of thumb we talked about earlier that will be sprinkled throughout the conversation here. But it's an example of a way to think about delivery. But in every company I've worked in, delivery was the bottom line. Could I get the projects done? Okay. And to do that, I had to have a good team behind me. Innovation. We heard a lot about patents and so forth. Well, in some companies, having a portfolio of patents may be a measure of innovation. In some companies, they don't care about that. They have trade secrets. They don't patent anything. And what counts is, do they get their product that's innovative on the marketplace? So assessing what's appropriate for your company and your team. If you're in a customer support team, the innovation might be in how to make the customer happier. If you're in an R&D team, the innovation may be a new feature in a product or a new networking protocol. Could be anything. So you have to figure out what's appropriate for your team and manage to those innovations and the expectations that you set. All too often, by the way, and we'll talk about this in my workshop on Saturday, companies push things at you. Apple and Microsoft are notorious for throwing technologies at you. You spend a lot of time at them, and then they say, well, we didn't really care about that. So you have to be very, very careful about what you take and embrace technology-wise, how you innovate, and what platforms you use to innovate from. And of course, innovation is always hard to schedule. Standards. To have a good programming culture, you have to have standards that are meaningful to your team. They're for everybody. You can't have exceptions. You know, there should be standards for design, documentation, testing, and process. There's also many other things that you should have standards for. This doesn't even mention coding standards, for example. But there are exceptions to standards, too. It's okay not to have standards if you can make a conscious decision about it and agree that it's the right thing to do. Communication. Communication is one of the keys to having any effective programming team, let alone a programming culture. So you need to encourage communication up in the organization, to your bosses, all the way to the CEO, if that makes sense, down in the organization, down to all of your team members, to them, if there are managers, down to their team members. Make sure it flows up and down, and always have an open door so that people can walk in and talk to you, or you can walk in and talk to them. So this communication has many different forms, and this is just, you know, a small list of what it could be. Certainly, everybody on your team should be able to articulate the company vision and mission. If they don't understand that, how will they know what they're doing? So when you bring a new person on board, you should make sure they understand the company vision and mission. What are the goals for the company this year? If they're working on a project or a product, what are the requirements? All of these things you have to communicate. You have to find ways to communicate. Is a documentation, is a wiki. There's lots of different ways you can take and communicate nowadays, but you have to make sure it happens. And of course, you cannot over-communicate. Just a quick question. How many in the room have virtual teams today? People who don't all work in the same office? Many. If you don't have it now, you will. It's an ongoing trend, and it's hard. It's harder than having everybody outside your office working together. So you have to have an even bigger commitment to communicate. You know, as we said, there's never enough communication. Well, here it's even more so. But I believe there's no substitute for face-to-face meetings. Time after time, I've had projects going on across the world where communication was difficult until we got people together, we saw eye to eye, and after that, some barrier dissolved. Even when we weren't face-to-face any longer, we had another form of communication that transcended the eye-to-eye communication. But the further apart they are, the more you have to formalize the communication and make it explicit. One of the people I work for at Evans and Sutherland, David Evans, told me a rule of thumb, which was people domestically, you know, the communication is a function of the square of the distance. The further away you are by square, the harder it is to communicate. So if they're in your office, it's a lot easier than if they're across town or even across campus. But it gets harder as you go internationally. It's a cube of the distance because you have time, distance, and culture also coming in the way. So, you know, working on finding ways to make virtual teams effective will be part of your job if you're managing teams. Teamwork, you know. You've got to have high-performing teams. Teamwork is key, having people help each other. But sometimes there's what we call heroes. So people will come in, and you have a project and it's running late, and someone will say, okay, I'll work all night, I'll work all weekend, and I'll finish it. Well, sometimes you have to have that done. But you should try to reward teamwork over heroism so that you don't require the heroes to have to happen. Hopefully there'll be a few times we need to have heroes. This is a very special one to me. How How many people here have ever fired anyone? It's not a bad thing. Sometimes it's the best thing you can do. Don't tolerate jerks, cynics, and bozos. People like this will take and erode your organization's performance. Okay? These people who no one can get along with, they may be brilliant programmers, but if they are eroding everyone else's performance, it's bad. And the sooner you take care of it, the better it will be. So, also, how you deal with these people, you deal with them professionally. You deal with them in a way where everyone knows it wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment random decision. You talked to them, you made them understand there was a problem. They didn't measure up, they were gone. But how you take and deal with these can model the culture that you're trying to create. Empowerment. You know, nothing really encourages productivity as much as empowerment. Delegation, okay? Micromanagement will kill productivity if you let it. So that doesn't mean that you shouldn't know what's going on, but you should empower your people to do the right thing and assume they're doing the right thing. But, you know, if you never tell people how to do things, tell them what to do, and they will surprise you with their ingenuity. Trust but verify, however. Trust them, but make sure that you take and verify the results. I had a good example of this just yesterday. I was put on a plane in Basel on my way to Munich. Okay, when I got to Munich, I trusted that the gate they put on my card was the right one. I should have verified it because it wasn't, and I missed my connection. It cost me another 6 hours. So trust but verify can come in lots of different ways. Of course, we all know where it came from. Excuse me, excellence. Well, everybody wants an excellent organization. Who would not want an excellent organization? But to have an excellent organization, you really have to demand it. And when people don't measure up, you need to get rid of them. That doesn't mean you do it precipitously. It means you do it in a way where they understand the problem. And so many times when I've had problem employees who are not measuring up, they know they're not measuring up. Okay? And when I sit down to talk to them, they've thanked me for firing them because they knew they were not measuring up to the job. And they was weighing on them because they wanted to do the right things, but they weren't capable of it. So expect excellence, portray it yourself, and whatever you can find that is an impediment to it, remove it. Remove it zealously. Programming excellence is similar, okay? But in programming excellence, it's the specific tools, okay? Do they have the right tools to take and have programming excellence? You need to demand it, and if you don't have it, you need to fix it. So how many of you have ever done woodworking? You know, built tables, benches? Anybody? Have you ever tried to take wood off of a board without a plane? Sandpaper is very hard. If you got to take that much off, it doesn't work. Okay, if you don't have the right tools in woodworking, it's very difficult. The same is true in software. And there are so many tools today. Make sure that you get the programmers the right tools. For example, one of the tools that I went out and found for my embedded software team was something called static code analysis, which takes and examines your code before it's run to try to figure out where it may fail. And by putting that in, I was able to prevent problems for code that I was going to be delivering in cars that I couldn't upgrade. Once they rolled off the line, there was no upgrade plan. So we had to get it right. So I scoured the world for tools that could help my team do a better job of making great software. Everybody wants a place they want to go to work. In fact, you want them to have a place they don't want to go home. Okay, now what does that look like? You know, it really depends on your organization. In some organizations, everybody has a little office. Microsoft, one of the rules of Microsoft campus in Redmond is that everybody should have their own office. I personally like open spaces where people can communicate together, but not too open, maybe just open spaces for a team. So you have to figure out what works best for you and your team. And you want to have it be a place that, not one that you can't wait to leave. And this includes flexibility. How many people do you know where programmers show up at 6 o'clock in the morning? Nobody, okay. Programmers like flexibility. Programmers, we often call software engineering. In our book, we actually never use the term software engineering. We call it programming, because programming is more of an art than a science. It's a lot like writing a novel, quite frankly. It's a lot like painting a picture. When you start a program, you start with a blank sheet of paper, and you get to craft something. Now, software engineering has a place, and it's coming, but it's not the same degree of engineering we have today. So they need flexibility, they need openness, they need to be able to learn new technologies. And again, as I said, get them the tools they need to be productive. Professionalism. Professionalism is something where it goes back to mutual respect. If my team respects me as professional, meaning that I have integrity, character, an excellent attitude, competency, I conduct myself with respect, confidentiality, a touch of class, I have excellence. These are key traits, but professionalism could be I attend my local ACM meetings or my IEEE meetings or whatever it is, and participate in professional societies. That's an element of it, but it extends to your team on how you can take and get them to not only respect you as a professional, but think of themselves as a professional that are delivering products that meet or exceed the customer's demand. Fairness. Fairness is a key factor in a successful programming environment. And when I say fairness, I don't mean equal, but fair. For example, not all programmers should be paid the same. That would be equal. I believe that the best programmers, the most experienced, those that show the best results should be paid more. And those that are learning or on the way up should be paid less. That's fair. And anyone in my organization who knew that would agree with me that I tried to pay the best people the best salaries. I always tried to manage as if I had to post the salaries of each of my employees outside my door. Luckily, I never did, because it would cause problems. But I tried to manage that way as if I had to, because I wanted people to think I was being fair to them and to everyone. And communicate what you value. If you value integrity, if you value results, distribute rewards by that value. Always be learning. Programmers love to learn. That's why they invent so many programming languages, I'm sure. I'm not sure we need all of them we have. But set up an environment where learning is appreciated. Sometimes you have to force people to learn. I've had employees who I couldn't force to go to a trade show or a conference to learn something that I made go because I felt it would be better for their career in the long run. And they thanked me afterwards. So you have to figure out what works, again, for you and your team. But if learning is an important component of a successful programming culture. I love this quote, Teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea rather than how to chop trees. They'll figure that out. Passion. I've, for a long time, said that I would take passion over experience every time. That means that I know where I can go hire smart people, but I could go to Stanford or MIT or a variety of different schools to hire very smart people, but they may not be passionate. I want people who are passionate who are working for me, because they're the passionate ones who will go the extra mile, who do the things the best. And every superstar that I've hired fresh out of college who rose to be a superstar had that element of passion. And so that is one of the key ingredients I used in hiring people. And last but not least, in the end, know who your customer is. Know what it's going to take to make the customer experience. Customers can fire everybody in the company, from the chairman on down, simply by spending their money somewhere else. Great organizations know that. Great programming teams will know that the customer experience, don't just leave it up to the product manager. Everybody should own the customer experience. Okay? They should be striving to delight the customer in every way, not just do the things they think are cool. So those are what I believe are the keys to success in crafting an effective programming culture. I have a summary sheet that has these. If you want oh, and also make sure you have a program manager. But if you want, you can send me an email, and I'll be happy to take and send you that sheet that I showed you that summarizes the points we just talked about here. If you're coming to our workshop on Saturday, it'll be part of the workshop as well. So, do I have any questions? Okay, sure.
Коллеги, пожалуйста, вопросы. Вопросы можно задавать и по-русски, и по-английски, но обязательно в микрофон.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. And I have a question about this bozos, jerks, and cynics part. It's well known, well, at least it's part of our legends, that the productivity of software developers can differ as 1 to 10, 1 to 100. And according to my experience, there is some correlation between being very effective and being a jerk. So do you think if you have the most effective developer in your team, a jerk, cynic, and bozo at the same time, you have to fire him? Or
So that's a very good question, because I've had those people, and I agree with you. There is a high correlation between very high-performing programmers, okay, 10x, 20x, 30x, I don't know about 100x, but I'll go to 20 or 30 maybe, 10 for sure. And I've had some, in the end I end up firing. Because the toll on the organization, regardless of their great contributions, was too much. However, I've also had a lot more that I put up with and coached and worked with, so that if they were going to be a jerk, at least it was just to me. Cynics, that's a different story. Cynics typically they can be cynical, but not necessarily. It's not as high a correlation to that. But again, I've counseled certain people who are cynical. They had to either stop it or leave. But I just think that if you tolerate that within an organization, you're asking for trouble. But that doesn't mean you can't have people who have those aspects. You just need to counsel them when to exhibit it. Don't go around doing it to everybody. Do it to me.
I was quite interested in your description of the interplay between the programming culture one tries to impose and the official company values. And your advice was embrace the good, wall off the bad. I just wonder to what extent walling over the bad is actually possible. I'll give a practical example. Let's say one of the official company values is we value simplicity. And this is used by certain project teams to justify, for example, never writing down their designs for the sake of simplicity. So how do I cope with this if I need to review design from the application security point of view as part of my job?
Yes. Well, so it can't be a crutch, I believe. Okay? Simplicity, there is simplicity, elegance in simplicity, but that doesn't mean non-existent. I mean, I believe that you could take their argument and turn it around on them somehow, okay? To say, if what is one simplicity, then let's simplify the communication to the rest of the team so they know what the design is. But you have to embrace the good and wall off the bad, but it is difficult sometimes. But pick out the pieces that work for you, and some of them, if they're trying to take and embrace them too much, I think you just have to work with that team in a special way. That's what I would do.
Okay. Коллеги, вопрос еще? Если вопросов нет, давайте поблагодарим докладчика. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. Thank you very much.